So this is my second bookbinding tutorial, and it's quite a long video, so I thought I'd just at the beginning show you briefly what I'm going to be doing in this video, which is different from my previous video, and then you can make a decision whether it's worth your time to watch it. You might only feel that you need to watch one, you might want to watch both. I just leave that to you. So the most obvious difference between this and the previous book that I demonstrated is that it's got paper on the cover instead of fabric. And this particular paper I marbled myself, that's in a separate video. But in this video I'll show you the process of, it's still got hard covers, but the decorative part of it is paper. And the other thing which is different is that I used coloured thread when I did the stitching. It's only pale blue, it's not like a big bold colour, but a few people had mentioned on my previous one that it would have been easier to see the stitching process with a colour rather than white, which I'd used previously. So I took that on board, and yeah, we've got coloured stitching in this one. And then obviously you also see here a little ribbon bookmark which is firmly attached. And the last difference is I've got a big chunky pocket in the back of this, but basically when I get to the pocket section I kind of demonstrate 4 or maybe 5 different types of pockets that you can put in the back of your notebook, sketchbook, whatever kind of book you're making. Or you can put the pocket in the front if you like. And then in this particular one I did like a box section pocket because I've got like a chunky extra inclusion that I wanted to put in a pocket in the back. And it didn't go so well because I got my measurements a little bit off. I should have done the spine a little bit wider, but you'll see that later if you decide to watch. And I hope you will, and I hope it will help you with your own bookbinding. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to bind these pages into a final hardbound book. As you can see, this is not a blank sketchbook, this is already filled in. As it's a bookbinding video and not specifically an Inktober video, I'll put a link to my Inktober playlist if you're interested in the content of this little book. Let's move on with the actual binding. In my previous bookbinding tutorial I did fabric cover for my book. This time I'm going to be using paper, which is obviously much more fragile and needs to be treated differently, obviously, than fabric. These particular sheets of paper that I've got here are ones which I did yesterday actually, and I filmed a separate video on how I did this marbling process. I'll link that in the description if you want to have a look how I did this. Now for this particular book I've decided that I'm going to just use the black and white marble for the cover, and then one of these which has also got blue for the end papers. I've not decided yet which one I'm going to use for the end papers, but we don't need to worry about that just yet. For the cover paper, what I like to do is I like to give it 2 coats of Mod Podge. So I just brush one coat on this way, leave it to dry, and then brush another coat on this way. And what that does is it gives the paper a sort of almost, it's like a plasticky sort of coating on it, so that it's flexible, but it's just a little bit more durable. So as that's going to be a fairly time consuming part of the process, that's why I'm starting with this. Normally I would start with stitching the pages together, but that can be done later. I just want to get this first layer on so that can be drying. So we'll just put some scrap paper underneath. And ignore the fact that this jar says it's amaretto almond flavour coffee. It's Mod Podge. I've got a big tub of Mod Podge, which is a bit unwieldy, so I just pour some into this smaller jar. Just makes life a little bit easier for me. And then I just paint it on. You want to brush it on as smooth as you can. Doesn't matter too much about sort of lines in it, but you don't want big blobs, you want it fairly smooth. Okay, that's a fairly good coating. Obviously it curls up a little bit because it's wet and it's water-based, so it does curl the paper a little bit, but once you've got 2 layers on and it's dry, it'll be absolutely fine. Okay, so I'm going to go and wash out my brush and then just leave that to dry. Okay, so the first coat's dry. I'm starting to lose daylight a little bit, so I thought I'd better just quickly film the second coat, and hopefully I stay in frame this time. I'm sure 1 coat would probably be adequate, but I'd like to do 2, and especially as one is done vertically and one horizontally, so if you do see any of the brush strokes, it sort of almost gives the impression of like a canvas weave, which I just think is quite nice. It just looks more deliberate rather than, oh, we can see brush strokes. I could have actually started on sewing the pages together while I was waiting for the first coat to dry, but what I've actually been doing is editing the video of the marbled paper process. Okay, so that's the second coat of Mod Podge done. Okay, so it's now the next day. Obviously I didn't need to leave this overnight to dry, but I wanted to film as much as possible in the daylight. Okay, so we can put that aside for now and think about binding our book. So this particular book that I'm binding has got 9 of these sections, which are called signatures, and in each one I've just got 2 sheets of paper folded together. If you've got really thick paper, you might want to just do 1 at a time. If you've got thin paper, you can put more pages together. And then we need to put some holes in the folds so that we can stitch the pages together. And what I've got here is I've just got a scrap piece of paper that is the same size as my book pages, and as before, all I've got is a folded up tea towel, just something that when you're poking the holes through, you're not just poking straight into your table, just gives it a little bit of cushioning. I've got this awl with a sharp point on the end. I have actually got 2, I don't know where the other one is, but this is fine. If you've not got one of these, just a sewing needle will be fine. This is just nicer because it gives you something a little bit more to hold on to. And then we want to think about, let's do it the other way up because it's really messy. Just want to think about where we want to put our holes. And for the binding that I do, generally I do an odd number of holes. So we'll start off with 1 roughly in the middle, and then 1 near the top, near the bottom. A book this size, you could just go with 3, but personally I prefer to do 5. So just sort of halfway-ish between. It doesn't have to be exact. You can measure it if it bothers you, if it's not exact. And then we're just going to use that as a guide. I will just make a little mark on here. Whoops, yeah, the pen doesn't work very well. But that's the top, because because I did do it just by eye, and I can already see that they're not evenly spaced. If I punched some holes that way and some that way by accident, when I bind my book, I'm going to have a section of the book sticking out, and you don't want that. You want it to be nice and even. So we just take our first signature, open it up, put our template inside, and then just poke through the same holes. Okay, so that's all my holes poked. They're not lined up quite as perfectly as I would like. I did kind of rush through that a little bit, so take note of that, don't rush. Okay, so let's move this out of the way, we don't need that anymore. And in my previous binding video, most people had commented that the step-by-step of the stitching was easy to follow, but a few people did comment that it would have been easier to see the stitching if I'd used coloured thread. So that's what I'm going to do today. I've got this pale blue, so I'm hoping that that will be enough of a contrast for you to be able to see what's going on. And it's just an embroidery floss. I wouldn't normally use something this thick. Normally what I do is I just use normal sewing cotton thread and just do a double layer of the cotton, but to try and help make it clearer on this video than it was previously, I'm going to use this blue colour and do it the full thickness. So I'll just pull some of this out. I'm not going to try and measure how much I need. I'm just going to cut off as much as I feel I can manage without it getting too tangled. Okay, let's get the needle threaded. Okay, I'm going to start from the back and work my way forward. Doesn't really matter too much, I don't think, which way you work, as long as you follow in the same routine so you don't get in a muddle. This next part will be basically the same as what I showed in the previous video, so if you already know how to do this, then you can just kind of skip ahead. The first 3 signatures are each done slightly differently, but from that point on it all follows the same pattern. So when you start on the first one, so you want to open up your signature, and I'm going to go down through the first hole, come back up through the second hole, and then I'm just going to, oops, standing on the end of my thread. Obviously longer than I thought it was. And you just want to leave a long enough thread at the start so that you can tie a knot in that, so that you just want to then hold on to it to make sure that you don't accidentally pull it all the way through. Okay, so then back down through the next one, and back up and back down. Okay, so you've just basically just zigzagged from the top to the bottom, and then you want to come back the opposite way. So we went down through the bottom hole, so then we want to come back up through the next one and back down. And back up. Okay, and then here you want to just give your threads a little pull. Obviously don't pull it too tight that you rip the paper, but you want it nice and snug. You don't want any baggy stitches. Okay, so when you're happy that that's quite tight, then you want to just tie off this end. Oops. I'm going to do 3 knots, nice and tight. Okay, if you want, you can snip that loose end off so that that's not getting in your way. Okay, so that's the first one done. So we just went in and out from top to bottom and then back the other way. So then you want to take the next section, and again we go in down the first hole, back up the second one, and we need to attach this to the first one. So where we've got these 2 stitches here, we want to go under this one, and then back up under the other one. So you can see what we've done. We've just looped the thread sort of either side of the stitch hole, and then when you pull that, oops, that then links those 2 parts together. Now at this point, instead of jumping down to the next hole, you go back in the same hole, but obviously it's not gonna, oops, I've got a little knot there. It's not going to pull all the way through the hole because it's secured around these 2 stitches. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So then you come up in the middle hole and do the same thing where you go down and then come back up through the other stitch. So again, you're looping around between those 2 stitches and then back in the same hole on the second signature. And the next one. Oh, I've got that in a twist, sorry. What have I done there? Let me just undo that one. Okay, so you go down through the one stitch and back up through the other stitch. And then back in the same hole on the second signature. And the bottom one. Now obviously we've not got 2 stitches to loop under and back here, so we'll just go from the bottom up through that previous stitch. And what I quite like to do at this point, once you know that one is quite snug, I like to do another one. Oh, I forget how tangly the embroidery floss gets. And then when you've got just the little loop there, just put the needle through that loop and pull that into a little knot. Now that's not necessary, but it anchors those 2 signatures together so that this last stitch isn't going to suddenly get baggy. Okay, So then we take the next one. Now at this point, this is where we can start doing what is the normal stitch to connect the signatures together on the third one. So we go down, oops, and then when we come back up, instead of going sort of through this way and back, what we do is find the connecting stitch between the previous two signatures. So you can kind of go down and under that one. That stitch is actually very tight. Didn't realise I'd pulled it quite so tight. Or maybe it's just because I'm used to doing it with thinner cotton. Okay, but then again you go back in the same hole again on the third signature. Come up the next hole and you just go under the stitch which is sort of between the first two. I really have done that tight. Okay, and then back down the same hole. Up. And loop under. I don't know if this is clearer than my previous video where I was just using white cotton. I feel like my hand is in the way a lot, so I apologise if it's still tricky to see. Okay, I'll just check those stitches are all okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing again, where I just do an extra stitch, and when I get down to the last little loop, just put the needle through the loop to do a little knot. So then the rest of it is just going to be a repeat of that last one that I showed you, but I'll just show you one more. So again we go down in the top, up in the second one, and then we want to loop under the previous stitch. And back down the same hole. Up in the middle hole, under the previous stitch, back down the same hole, up, whoops, up, under the previous stitch, and then on the end it's like under the previous stitch, and then as before I'm going to do a little extra knot. Again, the knot is not necessary, but it just helps keep it firm as you're going through. Right, I'm going to carry on and sew the rest of these, and then I'll just come back and show you when I get to the last one. Okay, so now we're at that last hole. and I'm just gonna loop under, and I'm just gonna do a couple. And then do a knot. Okay, so there we have a bound book, and you can see where it's in the centre of the signature, you see the blue stitches. I'm not completely happy with this. You can see my signatures are a little bit uneven. Partly that was to do with me punching the holes, but also I think when I cut the paper initially, like my paper wasn't necessarily exact when I trimmed it to start with, so it is a little bit of a wonky thing, but you know, it's handmade. Okay, and then the next thing that we need to do is to put some glue on this back edge. So we don't want to put masses on because we don't want it sort of sloshing down between the pages, but we do want it enough to give it a bit of a seal on that spine edge. And also it will seal in your loose ends of the threads as well. And one of the other things that I thought I'd do on this book, which I didn't do on the previous tutorial, was to put a little bookmark ribbon in. So all I'm going to do is just from about the halfway point, just attach that there. So I'm going to leave this aside to dry for now, and I'm going to start preparing the boards for the covers and the spine. Let's just put this to one side. Okay, so I've got this piece of board which is actually like a picture framing mount board. So this is just the centre bit that's been cut out of a picture mount. But if you've not got anything sort of that sturdy, you can just use thinner card and glue several layers together to get the thickness that you want. So that's what I'm going to use for the front and back cover. And then I've got this, which is just like a piece of file folder, which I'm going to use for the spine. I just generally find it works better if you use a more flexible piece of card for the spine. Okay, so for the sizes, this book top to bottom is 15 centimetres and side to side is 10.5 centimetres. So for the side, I'm going to keep my covers the same, so 10.5, and that will become clear a little bit later. But for the top to bottom, instead of doing 15, I'm going to do 15.5, which just gives a little bit of overhang either side. And I've got this poor old trimmer that I put through its paces. It doesn't actually cut all the way through in one go. I have to kind of cut it and then flip it and then cut it again. So I just need to open that arm out to do 15.5 for the height. You see, it sort of scores it, but it doesn't cut all the way through. And then if I flip it, and then I can cut that section off. Okay, and then for the width of the covers, I said 10.5, didn't I? So we'll keep it at 10.5. Flip it. 10.5 again. The other thing that you can do is to use a craft knife and a ruler to cut through, but I find it easier and quicker generally to do it this way. You probably do get through more blades on my trimmer though. Okay, so that's the two covers for the front and back. For the spine, you want the height of the spine to be the same obviously as the height of the covers. So that was 15.5, wasn't it? And then for the width, I don't actually know yet what width I need, do I? So when I bind this book, I've also got an extra inclusion that I'm going to be putting in the back in a pocket, which is this little passport, which has just got basically photos of the same sketches that are in here. If you've seen my videos about the story that I did, that will make sense, but I want to include that in the thickness because this is going to be going into a pocket inside the back cover. So what's our spine width? Let's say 1.5. I think 1.5 centimeters on the spine should be fine. Now then, this is our cover, and at the moment it doesn't matter if it's going to be this way or this way. So we just flip it over, and what we're going to be doing is gluing on our front and back covers with the spine in the middle, and we want to leave approximately 5mm gap, and that is the reason why when I cut the width of the cover I kept it the same, because there's going to be a little bit of extra width added by this gap at the spine edge. So hopefully with the cutting the height slightly bigger to get an overhang, and with this gap here, our overhang on this edge should be the same or near enough the same as the overhang on the top and bottom. That's the plan anyway. Okay, and then when we're gluing this, we want a nice even coat, but not too much, because as we said earlier, Mod Podge is water based and it will cause the paper to buckle, and we want to minimize that as much as possible. So we want enough glue on there that it's going to stick, but not too much that it's going to really warp. So at this point I'm going to flip it over so I can just make sure and sort of press around the edges to make sure it's sealed really nicely on the edges. Okay, at this point what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, it's sort of warping a little bit, I can feel it's kind of like bowing up in the middle, so I'm just going to put this underneath my cutting mat. There's not a lot of weight on it, but just a little bit, just to try and keep it flat as it dries. At this point I've got to make a decision about which of these papers to use for the end paper of the book. So we're going to go with this one. We want to fold these in half, and I'm going to make a decision about which one I want in the front and which one I want in the back. So that's going to go on the front here, and then on the back we're going to have this one. Okay, so you can still use Mod Podge to attach this, but I actually quite like to use this Fabri-Tac glue, just because you can get a little bead. Oh, she says it's like really stiff coming out. Oops. Just attach that. You see I've still got the long length of ribbon attached. I really should cut that off. Okay, and then just make sure I got that the right way that I wanted it. I'm so sorry about the quality of this video. I really should not be doing this and rushing it. I feel like I need to do another bookbinding video now, because I don't feel I've done justice to this one. Hopefully you're able to follow my chaotic back and forth, and also that where I glued the bookmark with the Mod Podge, it just doesn't seem secure at all. So I'm going to do some of this instead, because it is fabric glue, so it should work better. And I think as well what I'll do is I'll just cut off that bit of ribbon that had previously been glued. It's plenty long enough, isn't it? I don't have to worry about losing those couple of inches. Oh yeah, that feels more secure already. That's much better. Okay, and then while we're at it, let's trim off the length. How long should we have hanging out the bottom? I'll just cut it there at an angle. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a small piece of fabric. This is just a scrap piece of cotton that I've cut just a little bit shorter than the height of the book. Oh, sorry, it's the middle of the day and there's fireworks going off. I mean, what is the point in that? I hope it's not too distracting. Yeah, so I've cut the width of the fabric so it's enough to cover the spine and to go a little bit round the sides. And the purpose of that fabric is just to add strength to this fold. So I'm going to put it straight onto the book. So we've got a second coat of a second coat of glue going onto the spine. And of course this will also add extra strength to that bookmark ribbon as well, because it's going to be sealed inside. Why would somebody be setting off fireworks in broad daylight? I really don't get it. Right, anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the whatever my crazy neighbours are doing outside. Okay, so we just tap that down. Okay, and then I'm just going to leave that aside to dry. It's not got it on there very straight, but that's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to put that aside. And then we're going to come back to our covers. Now, because again, like the fold here is where it's going to have the most wear and tear from the outside perspective, I'm actually just going to glue an extra little piece of paper on here. It's just going to give it just a small extra layer of strength. But what you could do, I mean, if this If this was a larger book, I would probably do what I did on this one, with adding fabric on the outside, and that then really gives you the added strength on that join. But because this is a fairly small book and it's not something which is going to be, you know, treated harshly, it's not going to be something which is looked at every single day, then I feel quite confident that between the 2 layers of Mod Podge on the outside and just putting an extra layer of paper on the inside, and then obviously we've got the fabric on here, I believe that that's going to be enough. It's going to give it enough strength that it's not going to rip or fall apart. So let's put this bit on first. I'm just going to get a bit of scrap paper just so that I can make sure that I'm putting the glue right over the edges without worrying about making a mess. And then I'm just going to use my bone folder just to make sure that that paper is attacked right down into that groove between the cover and the spine. So that just gives that just a little bit of extra support. Again, it's still paper, you know, it's not like lead lined, but it's just a little extra layer. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to be folding the edges over, and we're going to just diagonally cut the corner. The only thing you need to be careful of is not to cut right up to that corner, because then after it's folded your little bit of board will be poking through a hole in the corner. So you want it just enough that it's going to cover that corner. So I'm just going to cut it, it's just a few millimeters wider, just so that it's, you know, that it's going to hide that corner. Okay, and then when we come to gluing these edges down, you want to do either both sides and then top and bottom, or vice versa. You don't want to go on the sort of 4 sides in order. You want to do opposites, and then that will just make sure that your corners are as neat as they can be and that you're not sort of overlapping in different directions each time. I hope that makes sense. Okay, and we want to fold that over, make sure it's nice and snug. You don't want it sort of baggy over that top edge, you want a nice neat finish. And then again, I'm just going to use the bone folder to go in that crease between the covers and the spine. Okay, then when you come to do the short ends, you see there's like an overlap here. Well, it's got a bigger overlap on one side than the other, but you want to just pinch that little corner in a little bit. You want to make sure you get some paint into the... Why do I keep saying paint? It's because I'm using a paintbrush. And then you just want to make sure when you fold that end over that you pay particular attention to those corners. Okay, so here we go. There's our cover. Now I need to make a decision about which is the front and which is the back. So at this point I also want to think about putting a name label on the front. Now I could do something like I did here, where I just did sort of several layers of kind of colour coordinated paper and wrote the title on. But I think for this one, I think what I'm going to do is actually put like a book plate. Okay, so this is the book plate that I've got in mind to put on the front. And then obviously you just slip a little bit of card inside with the title on. I've just got a little pot of assorted these like little split pins. So you kind of put that in through the little hole and then just separate out the feet or the legs, whatever you want to call them, afterwards. Now you can do that by actually poking holes in the cover so that you open the back part behind, but what I tend to do is one that I did for a previous project that I didn't end up using, is I just put the little pins in and then I just glue that on, and that seems to work fine. So that's what I'm going to do for this one. I'm going to use the Fabri-Tac glue again. This particular one it's getting a bit low and it's getting a bit thick and gloopy, and then you just want to obviously be careful not to get it in the recess, because that's where the paper is going to need to go. So I just want to get it on the raised lip on the edge. Come on, glue. I did actually try thinning this out using nail varnish remover, because it's a acetone based, and it did help, but I was sort of scared of putting too much in and then making it too runny. But I think it does need a bit more loosening up of that glue. Right, okay, apologise if my head gets in the way, but I just want to like get a good view over the top for getting this straight. Okay, just going to hold that down for a minute. Okay, pretty happy with the placement of that. Now I just need to cut a proper size piece of card to slot in there. So I'll put the title on that a bit later. My camera battery is getting quite low and I don't want to have to pause and recharge the battery if I don't have to. Okay, so now we're ready to attach our inside section into the cover. Now normally what you would do at this point is center it on the spine, so that you would then kind of glue this side down into the front and this side down into the back, so that there would be an even border around. But do you remember when I was working out the measurement of the spine, I wanted to include this as well. So this is something a little bit different that I've not done before, because obviously we need to kind of align the book part of it towards the front. So we're going to have a bigger gap at the back, and I realised that what that means is in the front we're going to have a nice even border on the three sides, but in the back there's going to be a bigger gap on this edge, because this piece of paper is having to travel further because it's not centered on the spine. I hope that makes sense. That wouldn't normally be an issue. Even if I was putting a pocket in the back of a book, the pocket would normally be quite thin. It's only because this is such a chunky thing that I want to put in a pocket at the back, so I am having to improvise a little bit. Okay, so let's do the front part first. And I will just say, when you're gluing it, you only want to be gluing the face of it. You don't want to put any glue on the spine, because that will restrict how it can open. You need to have this kind of open space between the sort of spine of your pages and the spine of your book, and that just gives you that bit of flexibility. Oh, shifting stuff around. So I'm just going to use the Mod Podge again to attach this, but what I am going to do is I'm just going to put a bit of scrap paper inside just to stop any glue like sloshing in. Normally I don't bother with this step, but because I thought, well, this is the video where I'm showing you slightly different things to what I showed you in the previous video, I thought I'd do it properly and put a scrap sheet in there. Another thing that you could do is put like a plastic sheet in, which might actually be better, but I'm just going to use scrap paper, and then you can slosh over the edge to your heart's content. Whereas normally I'm kind of trying to be really careful not to go over the edge too much, because I don't want it gluing onto the pages underneath. Let's take that scrap piece out. And this is where it's actually, if I do it, I don't know which is going to be the easiest way around to do it. Kind of want that lined up with the edge of the spine. Maybe I just put that down. So you want to try and get it so that you've got as even a border as possible. And I'm just going to put that down. You can tell I'm making this bit up as I go, can't you? Because it is different to how I've done it before. I've never sort of offset the back cover deliberately before. It's happened a few times by accident when I've got my measurements wrong. But I've never deliberately made the spine bigger than it needs to be to make room for a huge pocket at the back. So I hope you're following and can make sense of what you would do if you were not including a big pocket at the back, because that difference is just from how I measured the spine, really. And how I would normally do it at this point would I would kind of put that spine up and then just flip the back over, but of course that won't work with this one because my measurements are all a bit different. So we're going to do it the opposite way. So we'll put the spine down, and then just flip that. Hopefully you can see this from the angle that I've got the camera. Just want to make sure that's secure in the spine part. Okay. Yeah, so our block of pages is kind of closer to the front, and then there's like a little bit of a gap there. So I think when I'm going to leave this to dry, but I'm just going to tuck this inside so that it's kind of putting the pressure in the right place, and I'm just going to leave that underneath something heavy. I'm going to go and put a quick little bit more charge in the camera, so then I can be confident that it's not going to cut out in the middle of trying to show you the pocket. Okay, so I'll be back shortly. So as you can see, I've put the title in the book plate, but I've got some bad news. When I just took this out from under the weight where it had been drying, I've got a split. That has never happened to me before. Well, as far as I can remember, it's never happened before. And I can only assume that where I was trying to be extra diligent of making sure that the paper was stuck here where it was still attached to the spine, And I, you know, with the bone folder, I think maybe I was just a bit too aggressive with the bone folder, I don't know. Because obviously when the paper's damp with the glue, it's more fragile. I don't quite know what I'm going to do about that. If I was just using normal paper, I could perhaps just pull this off and put a fresh piece on or something. I don't know. I'm wondering if I can do something when I add a pocket in the back to kind of disguise that or repair that somehow. So I need to have a think about that. But in the meantime, I'm going to show you a few different types of pockets that I've done in the past. So this book, which is a bit bigger, let me zoom out. Okay, so this was a book which I altered. If you look way back on my bookbinding playlist, I did actually do a flip through of this book. But in the front and in the back, I've put these pockets. Now this is the most basic kind of pocket. It's just a little slip pocket. Not the most practical, you can't really get much in there, but it's okay if you want to just put like one or two specific things in a pocket. If you imagine this is your piece of card that you want to use for your pocket, literally all you do is just put glue along 3 sides and then just glue that down into your book, and that's your pocket. As you see, what I've got on here is like a little cutout, so if things get sort of pushed in, it's like a little thumb hole, so you can just get things out without having to poke your fingers in the pocket. And all I do for that, I've just got a 1-inch round hole punch, and you just put it halfway onto your paper, and then that gives you your little cutout. So that's like the most basic pocket, I think. Then the next thing I've got in this little book, I've been meaning to do a video about this one. This was from a project I did last summer, where we had a sculpture trail in my town, and I went and drew all the sculptures. But there was this little map which showed where all the sculptures were. And then I've just got this little easy access pocket in the back. So for one like that, all you do is you would just fold 2 edges, cut out that little corner, and then you would glue here and here. And then on this one, I also cut a diagonal off the corner. But you could do it sort of literally corner to corner, or you could do it curved, or any sort of shape really on that open side. So yeah, so I would just cut off that corner, cut out that corner, and then you would just fold those 2 edges, and then you would just glue those 2 sides down, so that you've then got your easy access pocket. This one, I've actually got 2 pockets in this book. The one in the front is kind of a combination of the 2 that we just showed, because it's one of these easy access where it's only glued on 2 sides, but I didn't fold the edges under. I just kind of glued 2 sides like this and just glued it straight down, and then just cut the angle. But the one in the back is probably the one which is what most people would expect to see in a sketchbook, and it's the sort of thing that you sometimes get in commercial sketchbooks, where it's like a little bit of a concertina, but it's just narrow at this end, but it's wider at this end, so you can kind of have easier access. And as you see, again, I did the little thumb hole. So how you would do that one is obviously along this edge you've just got one fold where it's glued, so that would end up being glued there, and then on these sides you've got sort of the flap which would be glued down, but then also two other folds which is your little concertina. Now if you wanted it really wide you could do more concertina folds, and then you would just cut out those corners. So if I just quickly just demonstrate that. Okay, so that's your concertina fold. Obviously you would do it neater than that. And then your other fold there. So when you glue it, you've got the three sides that you're gluing, but it gives you that little bit of extra breathing room for getting things in and out of your pocket. And obviously again, just do your little half circle if you want. I mean, you don't have to do that, but I quite like doing that. So I think that's probably, you know, like I say, the most common kind of pocket that people would perhaps do. But because what I want to put in my current book is more chunky, I've decided that I want to do more of like a box kind of envelope. So what that is going to mean is we're going to have the three sides where it's ultimately going to be glued down to the book, but then we're also going to have a box section at the side, and I think we'd need to cut off that whole corner, and then with our little thumb. So let's see if how that would work, and then I need to think about what dimensions I actually need and what kind of paper or card I want to use. So these folds would both go in the same direction. So not like the concertina where you're kind of going back and forth, and it's going to make this like little box section. So you'll still have the three sides to glue down, and our little thumb hole, but it's going to be a chunkier pocket, and instead of like this one where it's thin at one end and thicker at the other, we want it kind of more or less the same thickness all the way. So I hope that was helpful, that little whistle stop tour of 4 different types of pockets, or 5 really, because you can kind of combine these two as you saw. So now I need to think about how I'm going to repair that rip in the back of my book, and also the dimensions and what I'm going to use for my box pocket. So using this very rough example that I did just now, I've made this mock-up of my pocket to get the sizes, and what I decided to do was I decided to do the pocket shallow enough this way so that the book is actually sticking out a little bit, so it's definitely easy to get hold of, but I've made it bigger this way, and again so that it's going to be easy to get in and out. I didn't want to do it too tight, especially seeing as I know the back of my book is already very fragile, but with this size it would cover the the entire height of the book, not like right to the edge, but the same height as this paper. And what I'm planning to do, because I can't really use the other marble paper because that's too thin, I'm going to use some black card, and then maybe once the pocket's made I might use a piece of this to just decorate the pocket, and then maybe either use another piece of this or the black card to kind of repair this rip. I can't believe oh dear, so frustrating. It's like, it's bad enough when you do something like that anyway, but to do it like on the video. But I'm going to get on and make my little pocket. There's not really any point me telling you the measurements, because obviously if you're putting something in a pocket, it's not going to be this. But basically what I did was the flap, which is going to be glued down, I did that 2 centimeters because I wanted to make sure that's going to have plenty of room for like a real strong grip. And then this next bit is obviously just enough for the book to slide into. And then I've already explained about how I've done the height and the width of it. So I'm just going to get on and do that. Okay, so I think I've come to a decision about how I'm going to do it. I'm going to put this piece of black card down here. I might actually sellotape this first as well. Put this black card here, and I'm gonna use my corner punch, oops, to round the edges off so it looks a little bit more deliberate. And then the pocket will go here, and then I'm going to use some of this other marbled paper to go on that back bit and also on the front. It's going to look like a bodge job, but I think it's the best I can manage at the moment. Oh, it's finally done. It is still it does still open wider than I wanted at this side. I didn't allow enough extra room in the spine, but imagine how much wider this would be if I'd not tried to allow extra room for it. Oh dear, what a roller coaster it's been today. Okay, so I know this video is about the bookbinding and not about Inktober, but I just have to say that having this bound, and I think because it's typed and then along with my sketches, it like feels like a real book. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I know it is a real book, but yeah, okay. And then this is what I ended up doing in the back. I'm still not happy with how I've done this. It's ended up a little bit wonky, and it's not, I'm really disappointed with how I ended up in the back, and that's partly why I didn't film all the process of making the pocket, because I kind of felt like I'm just trying to fix something, and I didn't quite know what I was doing and making it up as I went along. So yeah, and then there's my little passport with all the same sketches in. So that just slots in there nicely. So I think it looks a little bit more deliberate like this. You know, we've got a black pocket with a bit of marbling. We've got a bit of the same marbling with a black edge. I think it almost looks deliberate, but just badly done. I don't know. Let me know what you think. So I'm relatively happy with most of it. Just a bit disappointed with that, how it ended up in the back with the pocket. So there you go. That's my book showing you with a paper cover rather than fabric. I've showed you adding a ribbon. I showed the binding with coloured thread, And I would say I showed you the pocket, but I think probably the most useful bit was where I showed you kind of the different varieties of pockets that you can do. Hopefully some of that was helpful. So thank you for sticking with me, especially that last section, and hopefully see you again soon.